Sometimes a man and his dog are all that stand between hope and greed. Sometimes the land we've given up on still has one more story to tell. When Elijah Crane rode into Ash Hollow, folks saw just another drifter with an old hound named Buck. The orchard at the edge of town had been dead for 30 years. Nobody went near it. But Elijah started working those twisted trees anyway. Then Buck started digging under the roots and wouldn't stop. What that loyal dog found changed everything. An iron chest marked with the U.S. Treasury seal, holding gold certificates worth $300 million. Word spread fast. Greedy men came with guns. Now one mountain man and his faithful companion had to protect a secret the West tried to bury. Would they survive what came next? Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. The road into Ash Hollow wound through hills that had seen better days. Elijah Crane rode no horse, hadn't owned one in 3 years, but walked with the steady pace of a man who'd learned that rushing rarely got you anywhere worth going. His pack sat square on his shoulders, and Buck, his blue-tick hound, ranged ahead with his nose working the autumn air. It was late September when they first saw the town, if you could still call it that. A dozen buildings slouched along a single street, their paint long since surrendered to the wind. The church steeple listed slightly to the east. Half the storefronts showed empty windows like missing teeth in an old man's smile. Elijah had seen towns like this before. The West was full of them, places that had bloomed with silver or gold or cattle, then withered when the vein ran out or the railroad chose a different route. Ash Hollow had the particular look of a town that had forgotten why it existed in the first place. Buck trotted back to his side as they entered the main street. The dog was getting on in years, grey showing around his muzzle, but his eyes stayed sharp. Elijah trusted those eyes more than he trusted most people. A man in a weathered vest swept the boardwalk in front of what appeared to be a general store. He paused mid-stroke, watching Elijah approach. Not unfriendly exactly, but not welcoming either. Just watchful, the way folks in dying towns tend to be when strangers arrive. "Afternoon," Elijah said, touching the brim of his hat. The man nodded. "Passing through?" "Depends. Looking for work, if there's any to be had." The man's expression suggested this was unlikely. "Name's Tobias Reed. I run the store." He gestured at the building behind him with obvious pride, despite its condition. "Not much work around here these days. Most folks who can leave have already gone. I'm Elijah Crane. This here's Buck." The dog's tail moved once at the sound of his name. "I'm handy with most things, carpentry, farming, general labor. Not particular about the work." Tobias leaned on his broom, considering. "Martha Hendricks runs the boarding house down the way. She could use help with repairs. Her late husband handled that sort of thing, but he's been gone 2 years now." "I appreciate the direction. Fair warning, though." Tobias's voice dropped slightly. "Town's not got much to offer. Population's down to maybe 40 souls, and most of them are too old or too stubborn to leave. We're just waiting, I suppose." "Waiting for what?" Tobias shrugged. "For it to finally be over, I guess. For the last person to turn out the lights." Elijah had heard that particular resignation before. It sat heavy in a place, like dust that never quite settled. Sometimes all a place needs is someone willing to see it different. Maybe so. Tobias didn't sound convinced. "Boarding house is the 2-story building with the blue shutters." "Can't miss it." The boarding house showed more care than most of the other buildings. Someone had kept the paint fresh enough, and flowers still grew in boxes beneath the windows, though they were beginning to fade with the season. Elijah knocked on the door, Buck sitting patient at his heel. The woman who answered was perhaps 50, with silver threading through dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her face had the kind of weathered kindness that comes from hard years, met with grace. She looked at Elijah, then down at Buck, and something in her expression softened. "Help you?" "Name's Elijah Crane, ma'am." "Tobias Reed suggested you might have work for someone handy with repairs." "Martha Hendricks." She studied him with eyes that missed little. "You running from something, Mr. Crane?" The question was direct but not unkind. Elijah appreciated that. "No, ma'am." "Running towards something, maybe, though I can't say I know what yet." Lost my homestead 3 years back to drought and debt. Been moving since then, looking for a place that might need what I can offer. And what's that? Honest work. Steady hands. And I don't give up easy on things other folks have given up on. Martha considered this. Her gaze dropped to Buck again. He friendly? Best friend I've got. Won't cause any trouble. She opened the door wider. Come in. We'll talk terms. The interior was clean and worn, the furniture old but well maintained. Martha led him to a kitchen that smelled of bread and coffee. She poured 2 cups without asking, set one before him, and took the chair across the table. I can offer room and board in exchange for work, she said. Can't pay wages, don't have the money for that. But you'll have a roof, 3 meals, and enough work to keep you busy if you're truly willing. That's fair. Place needs a new roof before winter. Shutters need rehinging. Fence out back is half fallen down. Probably 100 other things I've been putting off because I couldn't manage them alone. Elijah sipped the coffee. It was good and strong. I can handle all that. Might take some time, but I'll see it done right. Martha's expression remained neutral, but he sensed her relief. There's one other thing. Probably won't interest you, but I'll mention it anyway. The old orchard at the edge of town, about a 1/4 mile east. Been abandoned near 30 years. Owner died, his heirs fought over it, and it's been tied up in some kind of legal mess ever since. Nobody tends it. Nobody goes near it, really. Why not? She hesitated. Folks say it's cursed. Last 3 people who tried to work that land either died or went mad. I don't put stock in curses myself, but the fact remains, something about that place drives people away. Trees are all gnarled and dead-looking. Land's gone to brambles and hard pan. You own it. Town does, in a manner of speaking. When the legal mess finally settled, the property reverted to the municipality for unpaid taxes. Mayor, that's Sheriff Dutch Carmody. We're too small for separate positions. He's been meaning to do something with it, but nobody wants to touch it. Elijah felt something stir in his chest. Interest, maybe, or recognition. I'd like to see it, Martha raised an eyebrow. Why? Can't say exactly, but I've found that land folks give up on sometimes just need someone who'll listen to what it's trying to say. You talk like a farmer. Was one once. Good one too before the land dried up under me. Maybe that's part of what I'm running toward, a chance to make something grow again. The orchard won't grow. Mr. Crane, it's dead ground, maybe, but I'd still like to try. If the sheriff would allow it. Martha studied him for a long moment. Something in her expression shifted, as if she were seeing past the weathered exterior to whatever lived underneath. You're serious? Yes, ma'am. All right, then. Finish your coffee, and I'll walk you down to meet Dutch. He'll either think you're crazy or desperate, but he might just say yes. Lord knows nobody else has volunteered. Buck rose when Elijah stood, stretching his back legs one at a time. Martha noticed the way the dog moved. A little stiff, a little slow, and her expression softened further. How old is he? 12, near as I can figure. Got him as a pup when I was still working my own land. He's been with you through it all, then. Every step. He's the one thing I didn't lose. Martha nodded as if this explained something important. Come on. Sheriff's office is just down the street. They walked together, Buck between them, through the fading afternoon light. The few people they passed watched with curiosity but didn't speak. Elijah noticed the way they looked at the dog first, then at him, as if trying to measure what kind of man kept such company. The sheriff's office occupied a small building that also served as the jail, though the cells visible through the window looked long unused. A man in his 60s sat behind a desk, his badge catching the light from the window. He had the solid build of someone who'd been strong in his youth and hadn't quite let it go. Grey mustache, tired eyes, but his hands rested easy near a well-maintained revolver on his desk. Dutch, Martha said. This is Elijah Crane. He's taken room at my place in exchange for work. The sheriff stood, offering his hand. His grip was firm but not challenging. Dutch Carmody. Welcome to Ash Hollow, such as it is. Thank you, Sheriff. Martha taking care of you? Yes, sir. She's been more than hospitable. Dutch's eyes moved to Buck. Fine-looking hound. He's earned his keep over the years. I imagine he has. Dutch settled back into his chair, gesturing for them to sit. "What brings you to our little corner of nowhere, Mr. Crane?" Elijah repeated what he'd told Martha, adding, "She mentioned the old orchard. Said it's been abandoned." Dutch and Martha exchanged glances. The sheriff's expression grew cautious. "She tell you about the curse?" "She mentioned folks believe it's cursed. I don't put much stock in that sort of thing. Neither do I, truth be told. But something about that land isn't right. 3 different men tried to work it. First one, Jacob Thornton, fell dead of what the doctor called heart failure. He was 42 and healthy as a horse the week before. Second one, Michael Perry, started seeing things that weren't there. Had to be taken away to an asylum in Denver. Third one, old Samuel Reeves, just up and disappeared one night. Never found a trace of him. When was this? Last attempt was 7 years ago. Nobody's touched it since." Elijah absorbed this. "I'd still like to try, if you'll allow it." "Why?" Dutch's question was direct. "What makes you think you'll fare any better?" "Can't say that I will, but I've learned that sometimes land needs a particular kind of attention. Maybe the others went at it wrong, or maybe the timing wasn't right. I don't know, but I'm willing to find out." Dutch studied him for a long moment. "You strike me as a sensible man, Mr. Crane, not the type to go chasing ghosts or curses." "I'm not chasing anything, Sheriff. Just offering to do work that needs doing. The work might kill you, might, but I've been close to dead before, and I'm still here. I'll take the risk if you'll grant permission." Dutch looked at Martha. "What do you think?" "I think," she said slowly, "that this town gave up on itself a long time ago. Maybe Mr. Crane hasn't given up yet. That might be enough." The sheriff drummed his fingers on the desk, thinking. Finally he nodded. "All right. The land's town property, such as it is. You're welcome to work it. Can't pay you anything, but if you somehow manage to make it produce, we'll work out fair terms. That's all I'm asking. When do you want to start?" "Tomorrow morning, if that suits." "Suits me fine." Dutch extended his hand again. "Good luck, Mr. Crane. You're going to need it." They shook, and Elijah felt the weight of that handshake. It carried the accumulated resignation of a town that had stopped believing in second chances. He meant to prove them wrong, though he couldn't have said exactly why it mattered so much. That evening, Martha showed him to a small room on the second floor. It was clean and spare. A bed, a washstand, a chair, and a window that looked east toward where the orchard would be, though he couldn't see it in the gathering dark. Buck settled immediately on a rug near the bed, as if he'd been sleeping there for years. Elijah unpacked his few possessions. The compass his father had given him went on the small table beside the bed. He picked it up, watching the needle swing and settle. It had never pointed true north, not in all the years he'd carried it. His father claimed it was broken, but Elijah had come to think of it differently. Maybe it pointed toward something else, something more important than direction. He opened the window, letting the cool air flow in. Somewhere in the distance, he heard the lonely call of a coyote. Buck's ears perked, but he didn't rise, content to let the wild things be. Tomorrow he'd see the orchard. Tomorrow he'd begin the work. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Elijah felt something he'd almost forgotten. Not quite hope, not yet, but maybe the space where hope could grow if given half a chance. He extinguished the lamp and lay down, Buck's steady breathing a comfort in the dark. The last thing he thought before sleep took him was simple. Whatever tomorrow brought, at least he'd be facing it with purpose. That had to count for something. Dawn came cold and clear. Elijah woke before first light, as was his habit, and found Buck already awake, sitting by the window watching the eastern sky brighten. The dog turned his head when Elijah stirred, tail moving once in greeting. They descended the stairs together, finding Martha already in the kitchen with coffee brewing and biscuits in the oven. She looked up from her work, unsurprised to see them. "You're an early riser." Old habit. "Never could sleep past dawn, even when I had reason to." She poured coffee without asking, set the cup before him. "I packed some food for you. Figured you'd want to spend the day at the orchard." "Appreciate that. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen the place in daylight." They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't need filling with words. When Elijah rose to leave, Martha walked him to the door. "Mr. Crane," she said, her voice quiet, "I hope you know what you're doing." "So do I, ma'am." The walk to the orchard took 15 minutes through scrubland that had once been farmland. Elijah could see the ghosts of old furrows, the remnants of irrigation ditches long since filled in. The earth here was tired, worked past its capacity, and then abandoned when it couldn't give any more. He smelled the orchard before he saw it, not the sweet scent of apples or blossoms, but something older and sadder. The smell of wood slowly returning to earth, of vegetation growing wild and tangled, of a place left to its own devices for too long. The trees came into view as they crested a low rise. Elijah stopped, taking in the sight. The orchard covered perhaps 5 acres, arranged in neat rows that spoke of careful planning long ago. But the trees themselves looked like something from a nightmare, gnarled and twisted, their branches reaching skyward in tortured angles. Bark hung in strips from trunks thick as a man's waist. Not a single leaf showed green. Everything was grey and brown and brittle-looking. Buck moved forward cautiously, his hackles raised slightly. The dog's nose worked the air, reading things Elijah couldn't sense. "Easy, boy," Elijah said softly. "Just old trees." Nothing more, but even as he said it, he felt the strangeness of the place. Not a curse, exactly. He didn't believe in such things, but a weight, a heaviness in the air that made each breath feel deliberate. He walked among the trees, examining them with a farmer's eye. The trunks were solid enough, not rotted through. The roots, where he could see them, still gripped the earth firmly. These trees weren't dead, not entirely, just dormant, waiting. Buck ranged ahead, investigating the base of each tree. Elijah watched the dog work, noting which areas interested him most. Animals often sensed things people missed. Their instincts ran deeper, closer to the bone. Elijah spent the morning clearing brush from around the trees. He worked slowly, methodically, removing the brambles and weeds that had grown up through decades of neglect. The work was hard but familiar, the kind of labor that let a man's mind settle while his body moved. By midday, he'd cleared perhaps a dozen trees. Not much, but a start. He sat in the shade of one of the twisted trunks, eating the biscuits Martha had packed, sharing pieces with Buck. The dog sat close, pressed against Elijah's leg. There was something protective in the gesture, as if Buck sensed they needed to stay near each other in this place. "What do you think, old friend?" Elijah asked quietly. "This land worth saving?" Buck's tail moved once. His eyes stayed fixed on something Elijah couldn't see. The afternoon brought more work. Elijah pruned dead branches, cleared more undergrowth, began the slow process of exposing the orchard to light and air again. He found strange marks carved into some of the trees, symbols he didn't recognize, worn almost smooth by time and weather. As the sun began its descent, Buck suddenly left Elijah's side. The dog moved with purpose toward a tree near the center of the orchard, a massive specimen that must have been the oldest of the lot. Its trunk was easily 4 feet across, its branches spreading wide despite their twisted appearance. "Buck," Elijah called. "Come back here," but the dog didn't respond. He'd begun digging at the base of the tree, his paws working the earth with urgent intensity. Elijah walked over, ready to pull the dog away. Buck sometimes got notions about ground squirrels or rabbits, but when he reached the tree, he saw that Buck wasn't digging randomly. The dog had found a spot where the earth seemed softer, disturbed at some point in the past, and never quite settling right again. "What have you got there?" Buck kept digging, dirt flying behind him. His breathing came hard and fast, that particular excitement a hunting dog gets when he's onto something real. Elijah knelt beside him. All right. Let me help." He began clearing earth with his hands, following Buck's lead. 6 inches down, his fingers struck something solid. Not stone, something smoother, metal. His pulse quickened. He dug more carefully now, exposing whatever Buck had found. The object was large, perhaps 3 feet long and 2 feet wide. As more earth fell away, Elijah saw iron banding, heavy and deliberate. A chest. Someone had buried a chest beneath this tree. He sat back on his heels, breathing hard. Buck whined softly, pawing at the exposed iron. "Easy now," Elijah said, more to himself than the dog. Let's think about this. But his hands were already working again, clearing more earth, finding the edges of the chest. It took another hour of careful digging before he could see the whole thing. Heavy iron construction, sealed with what looked like lead solder along the seams. And there on the top, barely visible beneath decades of corrosion, a seal, an official-looking emblem with an eagle and shield, the seal of the United States Treasury. Elijah's breath caught. He'd seen that seal before, on documents from his homesteading days, on official correspondence from government offices. This was no private strongbox. This was federal property, or had been once. He worked the chest free from the surrounding earth, Buck dancing around him with excitement. The thing was heavy. Elijah guessed 100 pounds at least, but he managed to roll it onto level ground. The lid resisted at first, the seal having done its job well, but time and moisture had weakened it enough that with careful work and a pry bar from his pack, Elijah managed to break it open. The last light of day fell across the contents, papers, thick sheaves of official documents, yellowed but still intact, and beneath them more papers, certificates of some kind, ornate and formal, with denominations printed in large numbers, gold certificates, bearer bonds, financial instruments representing vast sums of money. Elijah lifted one carefully. The paper was stiff but hadn't disintegrated. The printing was clear. The United States of America promises to pay to the bearer on demand. And then a number that made his hand shake. $10,000. For a single certificate. He set it aside and lifted another. 20,000. Another 50,000. His heart hammered against his ribs. How many certificates were there? Dozens. Maybe hundreds, Buck whined again, pressing against him. The dog sensed his agitation, offering comfort the only way he knew how. "It's all right, boy," Elijah said, though his voice trembled. It's all right, but it wasn't. Nothing about this was all right. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to think clearly. Beneath the certificates, he found a ledger. Heavy leather binding, pages filled with meticulous handwriting. He opened it carefully, reading by the failing light. The entries dated from 1865, records of transactions, transfers of funds, military designations. And there, on the first page, a name and rank, Captain Joshua Brennan, Confederate States Treasury Division, Confederate Gold. This was Confederate gold. Elijah had heard the stories, like everyone who'd grown up in the West, tales of treasure trains that disappeared during the war's final days. Of gold, meant to fund a government that collapsed before it could be used. Most people dismiss such stories as legend. But here in his hands was proof that at least some of it was real. He read further. The ledger detailed how Brennan had been ordered to hide treasury assets, to keep them safe until they could be retrieved. But the retrieval never came. The war ended. The Confederacy dissolved. And Brennan was left with a fortune in federal certificates that had belonged to the losing side. The final entry, dated 1867, was different from the others. Personal rather than official. "I have planted an orchard above this cursed gold," Brennan had written in a hand that shook with emotion. "Let it serve as my penance and my monument. If God is merciful, the trees will grow, and this blood money will be forgotten. If he is just, I will die before I'm tempted to use it. May whoever finds this understand, some treasures are too heavy to bear." Elijah closed the ledger slowly. The weight of what he'd found settled over him like a physical presence. This wasn't just money. It was history. It was responsibility. It was a choice that would change everything. He looked at Buck, who sat patient and loyal in the gathering dark. The dog's eyes reflected the last light of day, trusting and unconcerned. Whatever Elijah decided, Buck would stand beside him. But what should he decide? His first instinct was to report it. Take it to Sheriff Carmody. Let the authorities handle it. This was government property, federal assets, even if they were 70 years old. There would be procedures, legal processes, proper channels, but even as he thought it, doubt crept in. Word of this would spread like wildfire. People would come, not just officials, but treasure hunters, opportunists, men with guns and greed in their hearts. This dying town would be overrun. And Elijah, as the finder, would be at the center of it all. He could walk away. Fill in the hole, leave the chest where he'd found it, tell no one. Continue his work on the orchard as if nothing had happened. The gold had been buried for 70 years. It could stay buried, but that felt like cowardice. And besides, Buck knew the dog had found it. In his simple, loyal way, Buck had changed everything. Elijah made his decision. He would tell Sheriff Carmody, tonight, get it on record, establish the facts, begin whatever legal process needed to follow. It would complicate his life, probably in ways he couldn't imagine. But it was the right thing to do. He couldn't rebury the chest, not safely. The hole was too obvious now, the earth too disturbed. So he dragged it to the edge of the orchard, covering it with brush and branches as best he could. It wouldn't fool anyone who looked carefully, but it might escape casual notice. By the time he finished, full dark had fallen. He walked back toward town with Buck at his side, his mind churning with implications. He'd come to Ash Hollow looking for work and purpose. Well, he'd found both, though not at all in the way he'd expected. The boarding house windows glowed warm against the night. Martha would have supper ready. The thought of food made his stomach growl. He'd been too shocked to eat the rest of what she'd packed. But first, the sheriff. This news couldn't wait until morning. Dutch Carmody's office showed lamplight. Elijah knocked, and the sheriff's voice called for him to enter. Dutch looked up from paperwork, his expression shifting to surprise when he saw Elijah's face. "Mr. Crane, you look like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost, Sheriff, but something that's going to change everything." Dutch set down his pen slowly. "I'm listening," Elijah told him. About Buck's digging, about the chest, about the certificates and the ledger, and Captain Brennan's final entry. He laid it all out clearly, without embellishment, the way a man reports facts he can't quite believe himself. When he finished, Dutch sat silent for a long moment. His weathered face had gone pale. "You're certain," he finally said. "About the treasury seal. About the denominations, I'm certain. And this chest is still out there in the orchard. Covered, but yes. I didn't think I could move it safely on my own in the dark." Dutch stood, reaching for his gun belt. "Show me." They walked together through the night, Buck leading the way, as if he understood the importance of what was happening. When they reached the orchard, Elijah uncovered the chest in the light of Dutch's lantern. The sheriff knelt beside it, examining the seal, lifting certificates with hands that trembled slightly. He opened the ledger, read Brennan's entries, his expression growing more grave with each page. "Lord have mercy," he breathed. "Do you understand what this is worth?" The ledger mentions sums in the millions, even in 1865 dollars. Gold certificates appreciate. What was worth $1 million then might be worth— Dutch stopped calculating. Could be $300 million in today's money. Maybe more. The number hung between them, too large to fully comprehend. "What do we do?" Elijah asked. "We secure this. Tonight, we take it to my office, lock it up, and then—" Dutch paused. "Then I contact the federal marshal in Denver. This is beyond anything I can handle. People will find out. They will. Can't be helped." Dutch looked at Elijah directly. "You could have kept this secret." "Why didn't you?" "Because it's not mine to keep." Dutch nodded slowly, respect showing in his eyes. "You're either the most honest man I've ever met, or the biggest fool." Maybe both. They carried the chest between them, struggling with its weight. Buck trotted alongside, his tail high, as if proud of his contribution to the adventure. When they reached the sheriff's office, Dutch locked the chest in the largest cell, then locked the cell itself. He stood looking at it for a moment, shaking his head. "Tomorrow, this town changes," he said quietly. "Hope we're ready for it." "Sheriff," Elijah said, "that night I saw someone watching Martha's boarding house, after we first talked about the orchard." Dutch's expression sharpened. "You think someone already knew?" "I don't know. But we should be careful. About who we tell and how fast word spreads." "Agreed. I'll send a telegram to Denver first thing. Until we hear back, we keep this between us, Martha, and nobody else. Martha, she'll need to know. You're staying at her place, and when this gets out, her property might become a target too. She deserves fair warning." Elijah couldn't argue with that. They walked together to the boarding house. Martha met them at the door, her expression shifting to concern when she saw their faces. "What's happened?" Dutch looked at Elijah. "Your guest made a discovery. We'd need to talk." She led them to the kitchen, poured coffee none of them would drink, and listened as Elijah repeated his story. When he finished, she sat very still, her hands folded on the table. "So the curse was real," she said finally. "Just not the kind of curse anyone thought." "Ma'am." "Greed, Mr. Crane, that's the curse. It's what killed Jacob Thornton." His heart gave out from the excitement of thinking he'd found something valuable. "It's what drove Michael Perry mad, seeing things that weren't there because he was too busy looking for treasure. And Samuel Reeves didn't disappear. He ran from whatever he found or thought he found because he knew he couldn't handle the temptation." Her words rang true. Elijah felt it in his bones. "The question is," Martha continued, looking at him steadily, "can you handle it? Because once word gets out, you'll be tested in ways those other men weren't. You found it. You reported it. But people won't care about that. They'll see you as the man standing between them and $300 million. I know. Do you really understand what's coming?" Elijah thought about it. About the hard years after losing his homestead. About the things he'd seen people do when money was involved. About the way gold fever could turn decent folks into something else entirely. "I think I do," he said quietly. "But I also know I can't walk away. This is bigger than me. Bigger than all of us." Martha held his gaze for another moment, then nodded. "All right, then. We face it together. You, me, Dutch, and Buck." She reached down to scratch the dog's ears. "Especially Buck. He's the one who found it, after all." Despite everything, Elijah smiled. Leave it to Martha to remember the important things. They talked for another hour, planning for what might come. Then Dutch returned to his office to keep watch over the chest, and Elijah climbed the stairs to his room with Buck padding beside him. He stood at the window. Looking out toward the orchard, he could no longer see in the darkness. Somewhere out there, under those twisted trees, the earth held the memory of what had been buried and found. Tomorrow, that memory would begin spreading, and nothing would ever be the same. Buck settled on his rug with a contented sigh. The dog, at least, was satisfied. He'd done his job, found what needed finding. The rest was for humans to sort out. Elijah picked up his father's broken compass, watching the needle swing to its false north. Maybe it had been pointing him here all along. Toward this moment, this choice. This chance to prove that a man could do the right thing, even when the wrong thing promised everything. He set the compass down and extinguished the lamp. Tomorrow would come soon enough. Sleep came hard that night. Elijah's mind kept turning over the events of the day, playing them forward into uncertain futures. When he finally dozed, his dreams were troubled. Visions of twisted trees and hollow-eyed men digging endlessly through barren earth. He woke before dawn again, but this time found no peace in it. Buck sensed his unease, staying close as they descended to Martha's kitchen. She was already up, dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she'd slept no better than he had. "Coffee's ready," she said. "And I think you should see something." She led him to the parlor, where a leather-bound book lay on the small table. Elijah recognized it immediately. Captain Brennan's journal from the chest. "Dutch brought it by an hour ago," Martha explained. "Thought we should read it properly, understand what we're dealing with." "He's already been through it twice." Elijah sat down, and Martha settled across from him. Buck lay at his feet as Elijah opened the journal to its first page. The handwriting was elegant, educated. Captain Joshua Brennan had been a man of some refinement before the war took him. The early entries were military records, dry accounts of troop movements and supply requisitions. But as Elijah read deeper, the tone shifted. Brennan's personal voice emerged, and with it, a portrait of a man being slowly crushed by the weight of impossible duties. May 1865. The war is lost. Everyone knows it, though few will say it aloud. General Lee has surrendered. The government, what remains of it, has ordered me to secure the Treasury reserves and transport them west. They speak of regrouping, of continuing the fight from Texas or Mexico. But I see the truth in their eyes. This is theft disguised as duty. They mean to run with the people's gold and leave the rest to starve. Elijah paused, absorbing this. Brennan had understood what he was part of, had known it was wrong even as he followed orders. The next entries detailed the journey west, the gradual dissolution of Brennan's command as men deserted or died. By the time he reached what would become Ash Hollow, only 3 soldiers remained with him. June 1865. "We have buried the treasury in this godforsaken valley. Lieutenant Morrison suggested we should take what we could carry and disappear. He was not wrong. But I am still, God help me, a man who follows orders. Even orders from a government that no longer exists." Martha leaned forward. "Keep reading. The next part is important." Elijah turned the page. June 15th, 1865. "Morrison is dead. Sergeant Cole killed him over a dispute about the gold. I was forced to execute Cole to prevent further bloodshed. Private Henderson deserted in the night, taking horses and supplies. I'm alone now with a fortune in certificates and nothing to do with them. The United States will not honor Confederate Treasury notes. They are worthless paper backed by a dead nation. I am the guardian of nothing." "So the curse began with them," Elijah said quietly. "The men who buried it killed each other over it." "That's not the whole story," Martha said. "Keep going." The entries grew more personal, more reflective. Brennan stayed in the valley, living rough, unable to decide what to do with his burden. Months passed. Then a year. Spring 1866. "I have decided. I will plant an orchard here, directly over where the treasury lies. Apple trees, symbols of peace, of domestic life, of the world I left behind when I chose to fight. Let them grow over this accursed gold. Let their roots bind it to the earth. Perhaps in time, people will remember this place for fruit, rather than for war and greed." Elijah looked up. He planted the orchard deliberately. As a marker, yes, but also as a seal. He was trying to keep people away. Or keep himself away, Martha suggested. Keep himself from the temptation to dig it up. The journal documented Brennan's years of labor. He bought the land through intermediaries, using the last of his personal funds. He planted the trees with his own hands, tending them obsessively, and he waited for someone, anyone, to come looking for the gold, but no one came. The Confederate treasury had been so thoroughly scattered and lost that no one knew where to search. Brennan's secret stayed buried. 1867. "The trees are growing, strange and twisted, as if the earth itself rejects what lies beneath. Or perhaps they reflect my own soul, gnarled by guilt, reaching toward heaven but rooted in sin. I will not live to see them bear fruit. I feel death approaching like an old friend. I welcome it." The next entry was dated 3 months later. "I am dying. The doctor in town cannot name what ails me, but I know. It is the weight of what I have done, what I have kept hidden. In my final days, I want to confess the truth. But to whom? The United States would seize the certificates and deny they ever existed. Treasure hunters would tear this valley apart. Better that it stay buried. Better that the gold remain forever lost." But then came the entry that explained everything. The one Elijah had glimpsed the night before, but hadn't fully read. A letter arrived today. From Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, United States Army. He was my counterpart during the war, the man whose forces I faced across 3 different battlefields. We never met face to face then, only studied each other's tactics and strategies. He writes that he has learned of my situation through mutual acquaintances. He offers forgiveness, says the war is over, that old enemies need not remain enemies. He suggests I let go of whatever burdens I carry from those days. He knows, somehow he knows about the gold, yet he does not demand its return or threaten exposure. He simply offers me permission to let the past rest." Elijah sat back, understanding washing over him. Webb knew Brennan had hidden treasury funds, but he chose to let it stay hidden. "Read the response," Martha said softly. "It's tucked in the back." Elijah found the folded letter, yellowed and fragile. The handwriting was different, clearer, more military. "Captain Brennan, I thank you for your candor, though you revealed less than you believe. I have known for some time about your burden. My scouts tracked your movements in those final weeks of the war. We chose not to intercept you, not because we lacked the capacity, but because the war was ending, and I had seen enough bloodshed. Let dead nations keep their dead treasures. The United States does not need gold built on slavery and rebellion. If you have hidden these assets, let them remain hidden. Plant your orchard. Live what life remains to you in peace. Consider this my order, soldier to soldier, though we wore different colors. Let the past rest. With respect, Lieutenant Colu and Marcus Webb. Elijah folded the letter carefully. Webb gave Brennan permission to bury it forever, to let it go, and Brennan tried to honor that, Martha said. The orchard was his way of sealing the gold away, not just physically but symbolically. A living monument over dead money. They sat in silence for a moment, digesting the weight of this history. The men who tried to work this land after Brennan died, Elijah said slowly. They weren't cursed by supernatural forces. They were destroyed by their own greed. They sensed something was hidden here, and it drove them mad trying to find it, or trying to resist looking, Martha added. Jacob Thornton bought this property from Brennan's estate. He might have known there were rumors about hidden treasure. The stress of wondering, of trying to decide whether to search or leave it alone, that could have killed him. The morning light had grown stronger, streaming through the parlor windows. Buck stirred at Elijah's feet, reminding him that the world was still turning, despite the weight of all this history. Dutch needs to see this, Elijah said. Needs to understand that the Union Army knew about this gold and chose to let it stay lost. That might matter for how the federal government handles it now. I'll take it to him, Martha said. You should go to the orchard. Continue your work. Show people that you're not abandoning the land just because of what's beneath it. You think people are already talking? Martha's expression was grim. Dutch sent that telegram at first light. By now, the telegraph operator has told everyone he knows. Word is spreading, Mr. Crane. Before noon, this town will know. By evening, people will be arriving from Silver Creek and beyond. We need to be ready. She was right. The careful secret they'd tried to keep would be impossible to maintain once the federal authorities were contacted. Too many people had to know. I should move the chest, Elijah said. Dutch's jail is secure, but it's already done. He moved it before dawn to a private location. Only he knows where. Better that way. Removes the temptation for anyone thinking about taking matters into their own hands. Smart. Dutch Carmody might be a small-town sheriff, but he understood human nature. Elijah stood, Buck rising with him. I'll be at the orchard. If anyone needs me, that's where I'll be. Martha walked him to the door. As he reached for the handle, she touched his arm. Mr. Crane, Elijah, you're a good man. Don't let what's coming change that. He met her eyes, seeing genuine concern there. I'll try, ma'am. The walk to the orchard felt different this morning. The same path, the same landscape, but Elijah carried the weight of knowledge now. He knew what lay beneath the earth, knew the history of pain and regret that had led to its burial, knew that his simple desire to work the land had uncovered something that 3 generations had managed to keep hidden. Buck trotted beside him, oblivious to the coming storm. To the dog, this was just another day, another chance to be with his person, to work and rest and be content with simple things. Elijah envied him that clarity. The orchard looked no different in daylight. The same twisted trees, the same wild growth. But now Elijah saw it through Brennan's eyes, saw the intention behind each planted row, the careful spacing that created a natural grid. This was a map, a living, growing map that would outlast bronze markers or written directions. He set to work where he'd left off, clearing brush and deadfall. The physical labor helped settle his mind. Out here, with dirt under his nails and sweat on his brow, the complications fell away. This was what he knew. This was what he could control. By mid-morning, he had company. Tobias Reed appeared at the edge of the orchard, picking his way through the rough ground. The storekeeper's expression was troubled. "Mr. Crane," he called. "Might I have a word?" Elijah straightened, wiping his hands on his pants. "Mr. Reed," Tobias approached, his eyes scanning the orchard with new interest. Looking for signs of disturbance, Elijah realized. Looking for where the treasure had been found. "It's true, then," Tobias said. "What folks are saying in town?" "You found something out here. I found a chest." Reported it to Sheriff Carmody, as was proper. A chest full of gold certificates, I heard. Confederate Treasury gold. Word traveled fast in small towns. That's what it appears to be, yes. Tobias's expression was difficult to read. Not greedy exactly, but calculating. You understand what this means for Ash Hollow. I expect it means changes. Some good, some not. It means opportunity, Mr. Crane, real opportunity. This town has been dying for 20 years. People have been leaving, businesses closing, hope fading. But now, he gestured at the orchard, now we have something that'll bring people back. Money flowing through, new businesses, a second chance. Or it could bring the wrong kind of people, Elijah said carefully. Treasure hunters, opportunists, those looking to take advantage of the situation. That depends on how it's handled, Tobias said. If the right people are involved in managing this discovery, it could be controlled, made to benefit the community properly. The right people, those of us who've stuck it out here when we could have left, those who have investments in the town's future. We should have a say in what happens with this gold. Elijah understood now. Tobias wasn't concerned about the treasure itself. He was concerned about being cut out of any benefit it might bring. Mr. Reed, this isn't my decision to make. The gold belongs to the federal government. They'll decide what happens with it, but you found it. Surely that counts for something. Vendors' rights, salvage claims, there are legal precedents. Maybe so. But I'm not looking to profit from this. I came here to work the land, and that's what I intend to keep doing. Tobias's expression shifted to something like disbelief. You don't want the money? I didn't say that. But I won't fight over it. And I won't let it change who I am or why I came here. The storekeeper shook his head slowly. You're either the most principled man I've ever met, or you're hiding something. Nobody turns their back on $300 million without a reason. My reason is simple. I've seen what gold fever does to people. Seen whole communities tear themselves apart over money. I won't be part of that. Tobias studied him for a long moment, then sighed. I hope you mean that, Mr. Crane. Because you're about to be tested in ways you can't imagine. When that gold becomes real to people, when they can see it, touch it, smell the possibility of it, principles get awful hard to hold on to. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. There's men already arriving from Silver Creek, rough types, the kind who follow treasure rumors. They're asking about you, about the orchard. Sheriff Carmody is keeping an eye on them, but he can't watch everyone. You should be careful. I appreciate the warning. After Tobias left, Elijah stood still for a moment, letting the news settle. So it was beginning. The transformation of rumor into action, of story into threat. Buck growled softly, his attention fixed on the western edge of the orchard. Elijah followed the dog's gaze and saw them, 3 men on horseback, sitting their mounts just beyond the property line. Watching. They didn't approach, didn't call out. Just watched with the patient intensity of predators waiting for the right moment to strike. Elijah returned to his work, but he kept one eye on the riders. They stayed for perhaps 20 minutes, then rode off without a word. The message was clear enough. They were interested. They were watching. And they would be back. That afternoon, Martha brought lunch, sandwiches and cold tea in a basket. She sat with him in the shade of one of the trees, Buck between them accepting scraps. You have visitors, she said. Nodding toward where the riders had been, I noticed they came into town this morning. Checked into what's left of the hotel. Rough men, Elijah. The kind who live by violence. I've dealt with their type before. I don't doubt it. But you're one man with an old dog. They're 3 and there'll be more. What would you have me do? Run, I just got here. No, Martha said firmly. I'd have you prepare. Accept that this situation is dangerous. Stop working alone out here. Let Dutch assign someone to watch your back. The sheriff doesn't have the men for that. Then I'll watch your back. Or Tobias, despite his calculating nature. Or some of the other townspeople who still believe in doing right. You're not as alone as you think, Elijah Crane. Her words warmed him more than he wanted to admit. He'd been alone for so long, 3 years of drifting, of temporary work and temporary shelter, that he'd forgotten what it felt like to have people care whether he lived or died. Thank you, he said quietly. That means more than you know. They finished the meal in companionable silence. Before Martha left, she touched his shoulder briefly, a gesture of support that needed no words. Elijah worked until sunset, half expecting the riders to return. They didn't, but he felt their presence like a weight on the horizon, watching, waiting. As he walked back to town with Buck, he found himself thinking about Brennan's journal, about the captain's attempt to seal away the gold, to let it be forgotten, about the Union officer who'd given permission to leave the past buried. But the past, Elijah was learning, never stayed buried. Not really. You could plant trees over it, you could walk away from it, you could try to forget. But eventually, someone would dig, someone would remember, someone would refuse to let it rest. The question wasn't whether the gold would be found. Buck had already answered that. The question was what would happen next, whether the discovery would destroy or redeem, corrupt or clarify. Elijah didn't know the answer yet. But he knew one thing with certainty: he wouldn't run. He'd found something here in Ash Hollow, not gold, purpose. A reason to stand, a piece of earth worth defending. Whatever came next, he would face it. With Buck at his side and people like Martha and Dutch willing to stand with him, he had a chance. Maybe not a good chance, but a chance nonetheless. That would have to be enough. The decision came at dawn. Elijah woke to find Dutch Carmody waiting in Martha's kitchen, his expression grim. "We need to move the chest," the sheriff said without preamble. "I got word last night. More men arrived from 3 different directions. They're gathering at the saloon, and the talk is getting ugly." "Move it where?" Martha asked, setting coffee before them. "My office. It's not ideal, but at least I can keep watch over it properly. And we need to establish clear custody before anyone gets ideas about taking matters into their own hands." Elijah understood. In the absence of federal authority, people would create their own rules. Better to have the gold visible and secured than hidden and vulnerable. "When?" he asked. "Now, before the town fully wakes. I've got a wagon ready." They worked in the pre-dawn darkness, Buck serving as lookout. The chest was where Dutch had hidden it. Buried again, but in a different location known only to him. It took all 3 of them to load it into the wagon bed. As they covered it with canvas, Buck suddenly went rigid, his hackles rising. Elijah followed the dog's stare and saw a figure watching from the shadow of a building. Too dark to make out features, but the intent was clear. "We're being observed," Elijah said quietly. Dutch's hand moved to his revolver. "Let them watch. Long as they don't interfere, we've got no quarrel." They made it to the sheriff's office without incident, but the damage was done. By the time they had the chest secured in the largest cell, people were stirring. By mid-morning, a crowd had gathered outside Dutch's office, demanding to see the treasure. The sheriff handled it well. He allowed small groups to view the chest through the cell bars, close enough to see the treasury seal, far enough to prevent tampering. It satisfied curiosity while maintaining security. Elijah watched from the corner of the office, uncomfortable with the attention. People pointed at him, whispered, speculated. Some looked at him with admiration, others with suspicion, a few with naked envy. Around noon, a new figure pushed through the crowd. A young man, maybe 25, with a deputy's badge pinned to his vest. He was tall and lean, with the kind of easy confidence that could tip either toward charm or arrogance, depending on circumstances. "Sheriff," the young man said. "Silas Court reporting. Got your telegram requesting additional help." Dutch's expression showed relief. "Silas, good to see you. Things are getting complicated fast, so I gather." Silas's eyes moved to the chest, lingering with obvious interest. "That's really it? The Confederate treasury?" "Part of it, anyway. Enough to cause considerable trouble." Silas turned his attention to Elijah. "You're the one who found it?" "My dog found it." "I just reported it." "Your dog?" Silas's tone suggested amusement. "Well, that's one for the history books." "What's his name?" "Buck." "Buck." Silas crouched, extending a hand toward the dog. Buck didn't growl, but he didn't approach either. Just watched the deputy with calm assessment. "Smart-looking animal. Probably saved you a lot of trouble reporting it right away. Some men would have tried to keep it quiet." "Some men would have been wrong to do so," Elijah replied. Silas straightened, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Indeed they would. Well, Sheriff, put me to work. I'm here to help however you need. Dutch assigned Silas to manage the crowd outside, which the deputy handled with practiced ease. But something about the young man bothered Elijah. A calculation in his eyes, a smoothness that seemed rehearsed. "You don't trust him," Martha said quietly. She'd come to bring lunch for Dutch and had noticed Elijah's expression. "I don't know him well enough to trust or distrust, but your instincts say something." Elijah nodded slowly. Buck didn't like him. Dog's usually a good judge of character. Animals often are. Martha glanced at where Silas was charming an older woman in the crowd. "He's from Silver Creek originally. Dutch worked with him on a few cases last year. Competent enough, but ambitious. The kind who's always looking for the next opportunity. And this certainly is an opportunity. For some." Martha's tone was meaningful. "Not for everyone." That evening, after the crowds had dispersed and Silas had gone to find lodging, Elijah helped Dutch examine the chest's contents more thoroughly. The sheriff had been through it once, but now they took inventory, counting certificates. Reading through the ledger more carefully, it was during this examination that Elijah noticed something odd about the chest's interior. A slight irregularity in the metal lining, as if it sat slightly higher than it should on one side. "Sheriff," he said. "Look at this." Dutch bent close. Elijah pressed carefully on the metal, and a section gave way slightly. A false bottom. "Well now," Dutch breathed. Brennan was thorough. They pried up the false bottom carefully. Beneath it lay more documents, but also personal items. A small daguerreotype of a young woman, a lock of hair tied with a faded ribbon, and a silver pocket watch, heavy and ornate. Elijah lifted the watch carefully. The case was engraved with flowing script, "For Joshua, may time grant you peace." He opened it. The mechanism had long since stopped, frozen at 347. But inside the cover was another inscription, in a different hand, "From Elizabeth, who loves you still, his wife." "I'd imagine," Dutch said quietly. "Or sweetheart. Someone he left behind." Beneath the watch was a letter, sealed but never sent. The address read, "Elizabeth Brennan, Charleston, South Carolina. Should we open it?" Elijah asked. Dutch considered. "It's evidence now, part of the historical record. But it feels wrong somehow, like violating a confession he wanted to make but never did." They stood in silence, holding the remnants of Joshua Brennan's life. A man who'd tried to do right, to bury his guilt along with the gold. A man who'd planted trees as penance and died before they could bear fruit. "He carried this with him," Elijah said, turning the watch in his hands. "Through the war, through the burial of the gold, through all the years of tending the orchard. It was always with him." "The weight of it," Dutch said. "Not the watch, the guilt, the knowledge of what he'd done, what he was keeping hidden. That's what killed him, not disease or age. The burden of the secret." Elijah understood that burden now. He'd only been carrying it for 2 days, and already he felt the pressure. The constant awareness of what lay secured in this cell. The weight of other people's expectations, suspicions, greed. How had Brennan carried it for years? "I'm going to the orchard," Elijah said suddenly. "Need to clear my head. Want company?" Dutch offered. "No, just need some time with the land, with the trees Brennan planted." He took Buck and walked through the twilight to the orchard. The twisted trees stood dark against the dimming sky, their branches reaching upward like prayers or curses. Elijah couldn't decide which. He found the tree where Buck had dug, the earth still disturbed, despite his attempts to restore it. He sat with his back against the trunk, the dog settling beside him. "What were you trying to tell us, Captain?" Elijah asked the darkness. "You planted these trees to hide the gold, but you also wanted someone to find it eventually. Otherwise, why the map in the ledger? Why the careful records?" The trees gave no answer, but sitting there, Elijah felt he understood. Brennan had been torn. Part of him wanted the gold to stay buried forever, to be forgotten along with the war and all its sins. But another part, the soldier, the man who followed orders, wanted it found, wanted someone to take responsibility for it, to lift the burden he'd carried alone. "I'll try," Elijah said quietly. I'll try to honor what you meant to do here, but I can't promise it won't get messy. Gold has a way of bringing out the worst in people. Buck's head came up suddenly, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Elijah tensed, reaching for the knife he always carried. A figure emerged from the darkness between the trees. For a heart-stopping moment, Elijah thought it was one of the rough men from Silver Creek. But then the shape resolved into Martha, carrying a lantern. "You shouldn't be out here alone," she said, her tone gentle but firm. I needed to think. You can think at the boarding house, with doors that lock and people who care if you come to harm. She was right, of course. Sitting out here alone was foolish, with so many interested parties arriving in town. But as they walked back together, Martha leading with the lantern and Buck ranging ahead, Elijah felt something shift inside him. He'd spent 3 years running from his past, from the loss of his homestead and the failure of his old life. He'd been a man without roots, without commitment, without anything worth defending. That was changing. This place, this dying town with its cursed orchard and buried secrets, was becoming something worth standing for. Not because of the gold, but in spite of it. When they reached the boarding house, Martha paused at the door. "Mr. Crane, Elijah, I need to tell you something." "Ma'am?" "My grandfather knew Joshua Brennan. Not well, but they spoke occasionally. Brennan used to come into town for supplies, and my grandfather ran the general store back then." "Did your grandfather know about the gold?" he suspected. "Brennan had money when he shouldn't have, paid in old currency that raised questions. But my grandfather never pressed, said every man deserved to carry his own burdens in his own way. Wise man. He also said something else. Said Brennan told him once that the orchard would only grow for someone who didn't want what was buried beneath it. Someone who cared more about the trees than the treasure. Elijah absorbed this. You think that's why the others failed? Because they were looking for gold instead of trying to restore the orchard. "I think," Martha said carefully, "that land knows the difference between greed and care. And I think you might be the first person to work that orchard who actually gave a damn about the trees themselves." She bid him good night and went inside. Elijah stood on the porch for a moment, Buck at his side, holding Brennan's pocket watch. He'd taken it from Dutch's office with the sheriff's permission, intending to study the engravings more closely. But now, standing in the cool night air, he understood why he'd really wanted it. It was a reminder. A physical symbol of what happens when a man carries secrets too heavy for one person to bear alone. Elijah wouldn't make that mistake. He'd been alone long enough. Whatever came next, he'd face it with others. With Martha and Dutch and even skeptical Tobias Reed. With the people of Ash Hollow, who were slowly becoming something more than strangers. And with Buck, of course. Always with Buck. He went inside, climbed to his room, and set the watch on the table beside his father's broken compass. 2 instruments that couldn't fulfill their intended purposes, but had found new meaning through the people who carried them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The federal marshal would arrive soon. More treasure hunters would come. The delicate balance Dutch was maintaining couldn't hold forever. But tonight, Elijah slept better than he had since finding the gold. Because he'd made his choice. He'd chosen the trees over the treasure, the living over the dead, the future over the past. And somehow, he thought Joshua Brennan would approve. The federal marshal arrived on the 3rd day, riding a solid bay horse and accompanied by 2 territorial rangers. Marshal Clayton Birch was a man in his 40s, clean-shaven and professional, with eyes that missed nothing, and a manner that suggested he'd dealt with complicated situations before. Dutch met him at the edge of town, and Elijah accompanied them back to the sheriff's office. A crowd had already gathered, word of the marshal's arrival having spread quickly. Inside, with the door closed against curious ears, Birch examined the chest and its contents with methodical care. He lifted each certificate, studied the ledger, and finally turned his attention to the survey map Elijah had found folded among the documents. The map was hand-drawn on heavy paper, remarkably well preserved despite its age. It showed the orchard in careful detail, each tree marked with a number, measurements noted in precise handwriting, and landmarks indicated with military precision. In the bottom corner was a notation: survey completed June 1865, J. Brennan, Captainus, CSA, Treasury Division. This is the proof, Birch said, setting the map carefully on Dutch's desk. This authenticates everything. The seal could be forged. The certificates could be clever fakes. But this map, this level of detail, this style of military surveying, this is genuine. So the gold is real, Elijah said. The certificates are real, Birch corrected. Whether the gold they represent still exists in federal reserves is another question. The Treasury will need to verify each certificate number against historical records. That could take months. Dutch's expression showed concern. Marshal, we've got treasure hunters arriving daily. I've got maybe 2 deputies I can trust, and a town that's starting to fracture under the pressure. I can't maintain order for months. I understand your concern, Sheriff. That's why I'm authorizing immediate federal custody of the chest and its contents. My rangers will transport it to Denver tomorrow. Once it's in proper facilities, the pressure here should ease. It made sense, logically, but Elijah felt a pang of loss at the thought of the chest leaving. It had become somehow important to him, this physical connection to Joshua Brennan and the history buried beneath the orchard. What about the orchard itself? Elijah asked. Will the federal government claim that too? Birch considered. The land is town property, correct? Yes, Dutch confirmed. Reverted to the municipality for unpaid taxes, then the land remains with the town. The Treasury will assert ownership of anything found buried there, but the surface rights are unchanged. He looked at Elijah directly. I understand you've been working the orchard, Mr. Crane. Yes, sir. On speculation of what might be found or genuine agricultural interest. The latter. I'm a farmer by trade, or I was, before drought took my homestead. I came here looking for land to work, and the orchard was available. And you reported the chest immediately upon finding it? Yes, sir. Seemed the right thing to do, Birch nodded slowly. The federal government recognizes salvage rights in certain circumstances, Mr. Crane. You found property of considerable value and reported it honestly when you could have concealed it. That demonstrates good character. When the Treasury completes its authentication process, there will likely be a finder's fee, substantial, though nowhere near the value of the find itself. Elijah hadn't considered this possibility. How substantial? I can't say precisely, but historical precedent suggests anywhere from 1 to 5% of the authenticated value. If these certificates prove genuine and redeemable, that could mean, he paused, calculating, potentially several $1 million. The number hung in the air. Dutch let out a low whistle. Even Elijah, who'd been trying not to think about the monetary implications, felt his breath catch. That's if everything checks out, Birch cautioned. And if you can prove sole discovery, if others claim they knew about the gold's location or helped in the search, it could complicate matters. Nobody helped, Elijah said firmly. Just me and my dog. And I've got witnesses to the timing. Sheriff Carmody and Martha Hendricks both know I only found it 3 days ago. Good. Keep those witnesses close. You'll need them. They spent the rest of the morning going through procedural details. Birch would take custody of the chest that evening. Store it overnight in the most secure location available, which turned out to be the bank. Vault in Silver Creek, and then transport it to Denver at first. Light, I'm assigning 1 ranger to stay here temporarily, Birch said, to discourage anyone from thinking they can search the orchard for additional items. The survey map suggests this was the only burial site, but treasure hunters won't necessarily believe that. Appreciated, Dutch said. Though I'm not sure 1 ranger will be enough. He won't be alone. I'm deputizing Mr. Crane as a federal agent for the duration of this matter. That gives him legal authority to protect the site and defend himself if necessary. Elijah blinked. I'm not sure I'm qualified for that, Marshal. You found the treasure. You reported it. You've been working the land honestly. That's qualification enough in my book. Birch produced a badge from his pocket. It's temporary and it comes with no salary, but it gives you standing to act if the situation requires it. The badge was solid metal, heavier than Elijah expected. He turned it over in his hands, seeing his reflection distorted in the polished surface. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll do it." News of Elijah's deputization spread as quickly as everything else in Ash Hollow. By afternoon, the town's attitude toward him had shifted noticeably. Some folks looked at him with new respect, others with resentment, a few with calculation, as if trying to determine how this changed their own prospects. The rough men from Silver Creek were notably quiet, observing but not approaching. The badge had made Elijah officially dangerous, someone who couldn't be simply intimidated or removed. Martha noticed the change too. "How does it feel?" she asked that evening as Elijah helped her prepare supper. "Strange. I've never been one for authority or official positions, but you're handling it. Don't have much choice. Buck found that chest, and now I'm responsible for everything that follows." She smiled slightly. "You could have walked away." "Still could, probably. Let the federal authorities handle it all, and leave the orchard unfinished." Elijah shook his head. "No, I started something here. I mean to see it through, even if it gets dangerous. Especially then. Running from danger is how I spent the last 3 years. I'm tired of running." That night, as Birch's rangers loaded the chest into a reinforced wagon, Elijah stood watch with Buck at his side. The whole town seemed to be watching. People at windows, in doorways, standing in small groups along the street. The chest's departure was both relief and loss. Relief that the temptation was removed, that the immediate security burden was lifted. Loss because something important was leaving, taking with it the tangible connection to Brennan and the history of the orchard. As the wagon rolled away, escorted by the rangers and Marshal Birch, Silas Cord appeared at Elijah's side. "Quite a sight," the deputy said. $300 million heading north, if it's worth that much." The marshal seemed to think authentication could reduce the value considerably. "Oh, it's worth it. My grandfather dealt in Confederate scrip after the war. These certificates are the real thing, backed by gold deposits that went into federal reserves after the war ended. The Treasury has to honor them by law." Elijah glanced at the young deputy. "You seem to know a lot about it. I've made it my business to learn. This is the kind of opportunity that doesn't come twice in a lifetime, Mr. Crane. A smart man would position himself to benefit from it. And how would a smart man do that?" Silas's smile was friendly, but his eyes remained calculating. "By making himself valuable to the right people. By having information others need. By being in the right place when decisions are made. Sounds like you've given it considerable thought." "I have, and I'm not the only one. There are men in Silver Creek and beyond who've been waiting for something like this. Men with resources and connections. When that finder's fee comes through, they'll want a piece of it. Better to be friendly with them than to make enemies." "I'll keep that in mind," Elijah said neutrally. Silas clapped him on the shoulder. "You do that. We could be partners in this, you and I, share information, watch each other's backs. Better than standing alone." After the deputy walked away, Elijah stood thinking. Buck pressed against his leg, a solid presence in the gathering dark. "That one's trouble," Elijah murmured to the dog. "Question is, what kind of trouble?" The next morning, Elijah returned to the orchard with new purpose. The chest was gone, but the land remained. The trees that Brennan had planted still stood, still needed care. That's why he'd come here, and that's what he'd continue to do. The ranger Birch had assigned a quiet man named Tom Weatherby, took up position at the orchard's edge, watchful but unobtrusive. Elijah appreciated his presence. It meant he could work without constantly looking over his shoulder. He was pruning one of the larger trees when he noticed something he'd missed before. The surveyor's marks on the bark weren't random. They formed patterns, numbers, and letters that corresponded to the survey map. He pulled the copy of the map that Birch had allowed him to keep and compared it to the tree. Yes, this was tree number 17, marked clearly on both map and trunk. And the map showed measurements from this tree to certain landmarks. Elijah began walking the orchard with map in hand, matching each tree to its designated number. The pattern revealed itself gradually. The trees formed a grid, but it was more than that. The spacing between certain trees was wider, creating what almost looked like paths or corridors. "Weatherby," Elijah called to the ranger. "Come look at this." The ranger joined him, studying the map and the layout. Interesting. Military precision. Like he was planning defensive positions. Or escape routes, Elijah suggested. If someone came looking for the gold, Brennan could move through the orchard using these paths. Hard to follow if you didn't know the pattern. Smart man, this Brennan. Paranoid, maybe, but smart. They spent the rest of the day mapping the orchard properly, updating the old survey map with current conditions. Several trees had died over the years, leaving gaps in the pattern. Others had grown far larger than Brennan's notation suggested, their branches interweaving with neighbors. As Elijah worked, he felt a growing respect for the Confederate captain. Brennan hadn't just buried gold and planted trees. He'd created a living puzzle, a place where security and growth intertwined. The orchard was protection and penance both. That evening, as Elijah returned to town, he found Martha waiting on her porch. Her expression was troubled. "We need to talk," she said quietly. Inside, she poured coffee and sat across from him. "There's talk in town, ugly talk. Some folks are saying you knew about the gold before you came here, that you researched the orchard's history and came deliberately to find it. That's not true. I know it's not. But truth doesn't always matter when money's involved. People are looking for reasons to claim you don't deserve any finder's fee, looking for ways to challenge your story. Let them look. The facts are clear. I arrived 3 weeks ago, worked the orchard honestly, and my dog found the chest by chance. Chance." Martha's voice was gentle. "Or Buck's instincts. Some are saying you trained him to find buried treasure, that it wasn't luck at all." Elijah laughed despite himself. "Buck's a good dog, but he's not that clever. He was digging after a ground squirrel, and his hole happened to intersect with the chest. I believe you. But you're going to need more than my belief. You're going to need proof, documentation, witnesses who can verify your arrival date, your intentions, your actions." She was right. The challenge was coming, inevitable as sunrise. People who wanted the money would look for any angle to claim it. "Then I'll gather that proof," Elijah said. "Starting tomorrow. Every person I've interacted with, every conversation, every witness to my work. I'll document it all." Martha reached across the table, touching his hand briefly. "We'll help. Dutch and I, and others in town who know the truth. You're not alone in this." Her touch lingered a moment longer than necessary, and Elijah felt something shift between them. Not just friendship, but the beginning of something deeper. Connection born from shared trials and mutual respect. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything." That night, Elijah sat at his window with the survey map spread before him and Brennan's pocket watch in his hand. The watch had stopped at 3:47, frozen in whatever moment had mattered most to the captain. End of a battle? Moment of decision? The instant he'd buried the gold? Elijah would never know. But he understood now why Brennan had carried it. Some moments define us, freeze us in place, even as time moves on. The challenge is to keep moving anyway, to honor the past without being trapped by it. He set the watch beside his father's compass. 2 broken timepieces, each carrying stories their owners could barely articulate. Tomorrow he'd continue the work. The orchard, the documentation, the careful navigation of increasingly complicated circumstances. But tonight, he allowed himself to feel the weight of what he'd taken on, and strangely, it didn't feel as heavy as he'd expected. Because he wasn't carrying it alone anymore. The week following the chest's departure brought a peculiar transformation to Ash Hollow. The town that had been dying suddenly thrummed with life, but not the healthy kind. More people arrived daily, most of them the sort who followed rumors of easy money. The saloon reopened to accommodate them. Tobias Reed's store saw business it hadn't experienced in years. Even the church started holding services again. Though whether from renewed faith or calculated positioning was unclear, Elijah kept to his routine, working the orchard from sunrise to dusk with Buck and Ranger Weatherby as companions. The physical labor grounded him, kept his thoughts ordered while chaos swirled in town. He was pruning one of the western trees when Buck's behavior changed. The dog suddenly intent on something at the base of an ancient trunk. "Not again," Elijah muttered. But he set down his tools and went to investigate. This time Buck wasn't digging. He was pawing at a hollow in the tree's exposed roots, whining with that particular insistence that meant he'd found something important. Elijah knelt, reaching carefully into the hollow. His fingers touched fabric, rotted and fragile. He extracted it carefully, a canvas pouch, stained and deteriorating, but still intact enough to hold together. Inside was another letter, sealed and addressed in the same hand as the one to Elizabeth Brennan. But this letter was to Joshua Brennan himself, and the return address made Elijah's pulse quicken. Lieutenant Colonels Marcus Webb, United States Army. "Weatherby," Elijah called. "Need you to witness this." The ranger joined him, and together they opened the letter carefully. The paper was in better condition than expected, protected by the canvas and the hollow's relative dryness. The date was October 1865, months after the war's end. "Captain Brennan, I write to you from a more settled world, though whether it is a better one remains to be seen. I have learned through mutual acquaintances of your situation and your burden. You need not confirm or deny what I suspect. Your silence on the matter tells me everything I need to know. I want you to understand something that perhaps no one else has told you. You were a good soldier. I fought against you, studied your tactics, respected your competence. The fact that we wore different colors does not diminish that respect. War makes enemies of men who might otherwise be friends. You carry guilt, I think, for what you did in service of your cause. Let me ease that burden if I can. The gold you may or may not be custodian of is not stained with sin more than any other military asset. It is metal and paper, nothing more. What matters is what a man does with his life after the fighting stops. I am told you have purchased land and intend to farm it. This is honorable work, better than the alternative some of our colleagues chose, continuing to fight through other means, refusing to accept that the war is over. If you have hidden assets that once belonged to the Confederate Treasury, let them remain hidden. The United States does not need more gold. We need men like you to help rebuild what was destroyed. We need former enemies to become neighbors again. This letter serves as my personal absolution, if such a thing from an enemy matters. You followed orders in time of war. Now follow your conscience in time of peace. Plant your orchards. Grow your crops. Let the past remain buried. Should anyone question your actions, should federal authorities come asking about missing Treasury assets, you may show them this letter. I will confirm that I authorized you to secure certain items for eventual return to proper channels when such channels exist again, which they may never do, and that is perfectly acceptable. In the final accounting, Brennan, we are all just men trying to do right in impossible circumstances. You chose to stay with your duty when you could have run. That speaks to character. Now choose to live with grace rather than guilt. With respect and, dare I say it, friendship, Marcus Webb, Lieutenant Colonel, United States Army. Elijah read the letter twice, absorbing its implications. Weatherby stood silent beside him, understanding the gravity of what they'd found. "This changes everything," the ranger finally said. "How so?" Webb was giving Brennan official cover. Permission to keep the gold hidden. That letter is effectively a federal authorization to leave Confederate assets buried. It undermines any claim that Brennan was guilty of theft or concealment. More than that, Elijah said slowly. It suggests Webb knew the gold would cause more harm than good if recovered. He was choosing stability over Treasury assets. A Union officer telling a Confederate captain to keep the gold hidden. Weatherby shook his head. That's not what I expected to find. Neither had Elijah, but reading Webb's words, he understood the man's reasoning. The war had ended, but the peace was fragile. Adding fuel to the fire of resentment and greed would serve no one. "We need to show this to Marshal Birch," Elijah said. "This letter could affect how the Treasury handles the authentication, or it could complicate things considerably," Weatherby cautioned. "Federal authorities don't like learning that their predecessors authorized hiding government assets. Truth doesn't care what people like." They rode to Silver Creek that afternoon. Elijah carrying the letter in a protective case Weatherby provided. Buck trotted alongside, happy to be included in the excursion. Marshal Birch was at the bank, overseeing security arrangements for the chest's overnight stay before its journey to Denver. His expression when Elijah showed him the letter was difficult to read. Surprise, certainly, but also something like admiration. "Webb," Birch said, reading the signature. "I know this name. He became a general, served with distinction in the Indian campaigns after the war. Died in 1882, highly decorated. Does his letter have any legal weight?" Elijah asked. "It might. It certainly complicates the narrative." Birch set the letter down carefully. "The Treasury's position has always been that Confederate assets became federal property upon the South's surrender. But if a Union officer authorized keeping certain assets hidden for reasons of stability and peace," he paused, thinking, "that introduces questions about intent and authorization that could take years to sort through." Years. Elijah felt his heart sink. "I'm sorry, Mr. Crane. I know you were hoping for a quick resolution. But this discovery, valuable as it is historically, makes the legal situation considerably more complex." That evening, riding back to Ash Hollow with Weatherby and Buck, Elijah felt the weight of frustration. He'd been honest, reported everything, followed proper channels. And for his trouble, he'd earned not clarity but complication. They arrived to find tension thick in the town's air. A crowd had gathered at the saloon, voices raised in argument. Dutch Carmody stood on the saloon's porch trying to maintain order. "What's happening?" Elijah asked, approaching cautiously. "Your friend Silas Court has been talking," Dutch said grimly, "telling anyone who'll listen that the finder's fee should be shared among everyone in town, since the land is town property. Says your claim is no stronger than anyone else's. That's not how salvage law works. I know that, and you know that. But law doesn't matter much when a mob gets going. And that's what we've got forming here, a mob that thinks they're being cheated out of money they believe they're entitled to." Elijah scanned the crowd and spotted Silas near the center. His young face animated as he gestured emphatically. Their eyes met across the distance, and Silas's expression showed no shame, just calculation and ambition. "He's trying to position himself as the town's representative," Dutch continued. "Claims he's protecting local interests against outside interference. Meaning you. I've been here 3 weeks. He arrived 2 days ago. Like I said, facts don't matter when people want to believe something else." A man Elijah didn't recognize stepped forward from the crowd. Late 40s, well-dressed for a frontier town, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "You Elijah Crane?" The man called out. "I am. Name's Vincent Mallory. I represent certain financial interests with a stake in how this treasure situation resolves. I'd like to discuss a business proposition with you." Elijah exchanged glances with Dutch, who nodded permission. They moved away from the crowd to the sheriff's office, Mallory following with 2 associates who had the look of professional muscle. Inside, Mallory settled into a chair with the ease of a man used to being in control. "I'll be direct, Mr. Crane. You've stumbled into a situation beyond your capacity to manage. The legal complications, the public pressure, the security concerns, these are not things a simple farmer can handle alone. I'm managing so far. Are you? You've got treasure hunters arriving daily, townspeople turning against you, and a legal process that could drag on for years. Meanwhile, you're living hand-to-mouth, dependent on charity. Room and board in exchange for honest work isn't charity. Semantics." Mallory waved a dismissive hand. "Here's what I'm proposing. You assign me power of attorney to represent your interests in the finder's fee claim. In exchange, I'll provide you with immediate funding, say $50,000, and handle all legal complications. When the fee is eventually awarded, we split it 60-40, your favor." It was a substantial offer. $50,000 was more money than Elijah had seen in his entire life. It would let him buy land, start over properly, rebuild what he'd lost. "And if the fee never materializes," Elijah asked, "if the Treasury determines the certificates aren't redeemable, then you keep the $50,000. I bear all the risk. Why would you do that? Mallory smiled. Because I believe the certificates are genuine, and I believe the finder's fee will be substantial. I'm willing to gamble on that belief. The question is whether you're smart enough to accept security over uncertainty. Elijah was quiet for a moment, feeling Dutch's eyes on him. Buck sat at his feet, a warm presence against his leg. No, Elijah said finally. Mallory's smile faded. No? I appreciate the offer, Mr. Mallory, but I didn't find that gold to profit from it. I found it because I was doing honest work, and my dog happened to dig in the right spot. If there's a fee, I'll accept it. If there isn't, I'll continue working the orchard. Either way, I'm not signing away my interests to someone I just met. That's foolish. Mr. Crane, you're turning down guaranteed money for the slim possibility of more. Maybe, but it's my choice to make. Mallory stood slowly, his expression hardening. You're making enemies, Mr. Crane. People who could have been allies. That's dangerous in your position. I'll take my chances. After Mallory and his associates left, Dutch let out a long breath. That took nerve. You know who that man is. A speculator, I'd guess. More than that. Vincent Mallory has connections to every major mining operation in Colorado. He's the man who finances claims, buys out competitors, and generally gets what he wants. Telling him no isn't something people do. I just did. Yes, you did. Dutch's tone was approving. Question is, what's he going to do about it? They found out 2 days later. A professional surveying team arrived from Denver, claiming they'd been hired to assess the orchard's value for potential development. They had official-looking documents and a work order signed by someone in the Territorial Land Office. Elijah refused them access. The orchard was town property. He was authorized to work it. And no one was getting on that land without Dutch Carmody's explicit approval. The surveyors left, but their message was clear. Mallory was looking for other angles. If he couldn't buy Elijah's cooperation, he'd find ways around it. That night, as Elijah sat in his room with Buck sleeping on the rug, he reread Lieutenant Colonel Webb's letter by lamplight. The Union officer's words resonated more now than they had when he'd first discovered them. In the final accounting, we are all just men trying to do right in impossible circumstances. Webb had understood, had seen that sometimes the right choice wasn't the legal one or the profitable one, but the one that preserved peace and prevented further suffering. Elijah thought about Mallory's offer, about the $50,000 he'd turned down, about the complications multiplying around him. Had he done right? Or had he been foolish, as Mallory suggested? He looked at Buck, sleeping peacefully despite all the human complications swirling around them. The dog didn't care about money or legal processes or business propositions. He cared about being with his person, about simple things like food and rest and the satisfaction of work well done. Maybe that was the answer. Keep it simple. Focus on the work. Let the complications sort themselves out. Elijah extinguished the lamp and lay down, listening to Buck's steady breathing in the dark. Tomorrow, he'd return to the orchard, continue the pruning and clearing, keep faith with the land Brennan had planted. Everything else, the gold, the fee, the politics, would resolve in time. Or it wouldn't. Either way, he'd still have the trees, and sometimes that had to be enough. The warning came from an unexpected source. Martha woke Elijah before dawn, her face pale in the lamplight. "Something's wrong," she said quietly. "I heard riders leaving town in the middle of the night. Multiple groups, heading in different directions. It felt coordinated." Elijah dressed quickly, Buck alert at the unusual early activity. They found Dutch already in his office, sorting through papers with a grim expression. "Marshal Birch sent a telegram," Dutch said without preamble. Or rather, his telegraph operator did. "Birch himself doesn't know about it yet. Seems someone's been intercepting our communications. Intercepting how? Messages copied and shared before reaching their intended recipients. The operator got suspicious when he noticed Silas Court hanging around the telegraph office during odd hours. Started paying attention and caught him bribing the night clerk to make duplicates. Elijah felt cold settle in his stomach. What messages? Everything. Every communication between me and Birch, between Birch and Denver, between territorial authorities. Whoever Silas is working for has known every official development before we did. Mallory, Elijah said. That'd be my guess. Question is, what's Court's angle? He's a deputy sworn to uphold the law. Why betray that for money? Everyone has their price, Martha said quietly from the doorway. For some it's lower than others. Dutch nodded grimly. I'm bringing him in. Elijah, I need you as witness since you're deputized. Martha, I'd like you there too. You've got standing in this community and people trust you. They found Silas at the boarding house where he'd taken a room. He was awake, dressed and somehow unsurprised when Dutch confronted him. I wondered how long it would take, Silas said calmly. You're smarter than I gave you credit for, old man. Dutch's hand moved to his revolver. You're under arrest for corruption, conspiracy, and interfering with federal investigations. Am I? Silas smiled. And who's going to hold me? You? You're sheriff of a dying town with no authority beyond its borders. Marshal Birch. He's in Denver by now with the chest, too far away to help. Face it, Dutch, you're outmatched. Maybe, Dutch admitted. But I'm still arresting you. What happened next unfolded with shocking speed. Silas reached for his own weapon, but before he could draw, Buck launched himself forward with a snarl that would have done a wolf proud. The dog hit Silas mid-chest, driving him backward into the wall. Dutch had his gun out instantly. Don't move, boy. That dog's got good instincts about people. Silas froze, Buck's teeth inches from his throat. The deputy's eyes showed fear now, the cocky confidence evaporating. Call him off, Silas said, his voice shaking. Elijah? Dutch glanced at him. Buck, release. The dog stepped back but remained coiled, ready to spring again if needed. Dutch moved forward and disarmed Silas, then secured him with handcuffs. Now, Dutch said, you're going to tell us everything. Who you're working for, what they know and what they're planning. You cooperate, I'll recommend leniency. You stay silent. I'll make sure every lawman in Colorado knows you as a betrayer of your badge. Silas was quiet for a moment, calculating. Then he sagged, the fight going out of him. Mallory, he said. I've been working for Vincent Mallory for 3 months. He knew about the orchard before you did, Dutch. Knew there were rumors of buried treasure, knew someone would eventually find it. He sent me here to position myself as your deputy, to be his eyes and ears when the gold surfaced. How did Mallory know? Elijah asked. Archives. Historical research. He spent years tracking Confederate treasury movements. The orchard wasn't the only site he was monitoring, just the most promising. When you showed up and started working it seriously, he had me send word immediately. What's his plan? To acquire the gold legally if possible, illegally if necessary. The finder's fee is real, but Mallory believes the legal process can be manipulated. He's got lawyers ready to challenge your claim, forge documents suggesting prior discovery, bribe officials if needed. He spent a fortune positioning himself for this, and you sold out for what? Dutch's voice was disgusted. A percentage. 10% of whatever Mallory nets. Could be $30 million if everything works out. Blood money, Martha said quietly. Same as the gold itself. Silas looked at her, and for a moment, genuine regret showed in his face. I know what you think of me, Mrs. Hendricks, but I'm not from a family with means. I'm not educated or connected. This was my one chance at a real future. You had a future, Dutch said. You were a competent lawman with prospects. Now you're a criminal. They locked Silas in one of the jail cells, and Dutch sent an urgent telegram to Marshal Birch detailing the deputy's confession. But as Elijah was preparing to leave for the orchard, Dutch called him back. There's more. I've been going through Silas's belongings, looking for evidence. Found this. He held out a telegram dated 2 days earlier. The sender was listed as VM, clearly Mallory. The message was brief but chilling. Federal authentication delayed. Birch compromised. Proceed with contingency plan. Authorization granted for asset acquisition by any means necessary. Birch compromised. Elijah read it again. What does that mean? I don't know, but we're about to find out. The answer came that evening. Marshal Birch returned to Ash Hollow unannounced, his arrival causing immediate stir. but something was different about him. His professional demeanor had cracked, showing strain underneath. Dutch met him at the sheriff's office, Elijah present as witness. Birch looked at them both, and something like shame crossed his face. "I need to make a statement," Birch said. "On record." "All right," Dutch said slowly. "What kind of statement?" "A confession." The word hung in the air. Elijah felt his world tilt. "Vincent Mallory is my partner," Birch said, the words coming with obvious difficulty. "Has been for 5 years. We met during a case involving mining claims. I was investigating fraud. He was the man committing it. Instead of arresting him, I took a percentage. Since then, we've worked together on various schemes. When news of your treasure discovery reached Denver, Mallory contacted me immediately." Dutch's face had gone very still. "You came here as a federal marshal, knowing your partner wanted to acquire the gold." "Yes, my plan was to authenticate the certificates, establish their value, and then quietly transfer legal custody to a holding company Mallory controls. The Treasury would get a fraction of the actual worth. Mallory would resell the certificates at full value, and we'd split the profit. The finder's fee you promised, Mr. Crane, would have been minimal, manipulated down through legal challenges and bureaucratic delays." "I'm sorry, Mr. Crane. You're an honest man, and you deserved better." Elijah couldn't speak. "The betrayal was too complete, too devastating. Why are you confessing?" Dutch asked. Birch pulled an envelope from his jacket. "This arrived yesterday, anonymous, but I know Mallory's handwriting." He handed it to Dutch, who read aloud. "Clayton, you're becoming a liability. Too many people know about our arrangement. After the treasure is secured, I'm cutting you out. If you attempt to expose our operation, I'll make sure your body is never found. Consider this your only warning. He's going to kill me," Birch said flatly. "Once the gold is secured and authenticated, I'm the only link between him and the crime. With me dead, he's untouchable." "So you're confessing to save yourself," Elijah said, finding his voice. "Yes, and because what we planned to do to you was wrong. I convinced myself it was just business, that you'd never know what you lost. But meeting you, seeing your integrity..." Birch stopped, shaking his head. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, just for protection. I'll testify against Mallory, provide evidence of all our schemes, if you'll guarantee my safety." Dutch and Elijah exchanged glances. The situation had just become exponentially more complicated. "Where's the chest now?" Dutch asked. "Secure vault in Denver. But Mallory has access codes. I was supposed to deliver them tomorrow, claim it was standard procedure. Once he has the chest, he'll vanish. Probably to Mexico or South America. Somewhere without extradition treaties. And the certificates? Genuine. Worth exactly what I estimated, maybe more. This is real money, gentlemen. The kind men kill for. Some already have," Elijah said quietly, thinking of Brennan's soldiers killing each other 70 years ago. History repeating itself because men couldn't resist gold's call. That night an emergency meeting was called. Dutch, Elijah, Martha, Tobias Reed, and a few other trusted town leaders gathered in the sheriff's office. Birch and Silas remained locked in separate cells, their confessions weighing on everyone present. "We have to assume Mallory knows his plan is compromised," Dutch said. "Birch's failure to deliver those access codes will trigger his contingency plans. Whatever those are, he'll come for the orchard," Elijah said. "If he can't get the gold legally, he'll try to find more buried treasure. Or he'll take me hostage, try to force information. Then we need to be ready," Tobias said. He'd been surprisingly supportive once the depth of the conspiracy became clear. "This town might be dying, but we're not dead yet. We can defend our own." "Against how many?" Martha asked. "Mallory has resources. He can hire an army if needed. Then we need our own army," Elijah said. "Or at least enough defenders to make attacking costly." They spent hours planning. By dawn, they had a strategy, not perfect, but better than nothing. The orchard would be defended, the town protected, and they'd sent word to legitimate federal authorities about Birch's confession and Mallory's operation. Help would come eventually. The question was whether they could hold out until it arrived. As the meeting broke up, Elijah found himself alone with Birch's confession and Silas's telegram. Two men who'd betrayed trust for money. Two examples of what greed could do to otherwise capable people. He thought of Brennan again, planting his orchard as both hiding place and memorial. The Confederate captain had understood something fundamental. Some treasures were too heavy to bear. Some wealth corrupted simply by existing. The gold beneath those trees had already claimed too many victims. Soldiers in 1865, workers in the decades after, and now more men drawn by its promise. How many more would it take before the debt was paid? Elijah picked up Webb's letter, reading again the Union officer's words about letting the past rest. Webb had been right. The gold should have stayed buried, should have been forgotten along with the war that created it, but it hadn't been. Buck had found it, and now Elijah carried the consequences. He looked at the dog, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos of human affairs. Buck had no regrets about digging that day, no sense of burden about what he'd uncovered. He'd simply been doing what dogs do, following his nose, investigating interesting scents, being himself. Maybe there was a lesson in that. Maybe the answer wasn't to regret the discovery, but to see it through with integrity, to refuse to let gold's weight crush his spirit the way it had crushed so many others. "We'll face it, boy," Elijah said quietly. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Buck's tail moved once in sleep, content and trusting. Elijah settled into the chair by the window, watching dawn break over Ash Hollow. Somewhere out there, Vincent Mallory was planning his next move. Somewhere, legitimate authorities were mobilizing. Somewhere, the story that began with the Confederate captain's guilt was rushing toward its conclusion. And here, in this small room in a dying town, a drifter and his dog waited to see what morning would bring. The rifle had belonged to Elijah's father, a Winchester model 1873, well-maintained and reliable. Elijah had carried it through 3 years of drifting, but rarely fired it. Bullets were expensive, and he wasn't a hunter by nature. But he knew how to use it, had learned as a boy on the homestead. Now, as he cleaned and checked the weapon in Martha's kitchen, it felt like saying goodbye to one life and preparing for another. "You don't have to do this," Martha said quietly. She sat across from him, hands wrapped around a coffee cup she wasn't drinking. "You could leave. Take Buck and walk away. The gold isn't worth dying for." "I'm not dying for gold," Elijah replied, running an oiled cloth along the barrel. "I'm standing for what's right, for the land Brennan tried to protect, for the idea that a man can do honest work without being destroyed by someone else's greed. Noble sentiments. Won't stop bullets? No, but they give the bullets meaning if they have to fly." She was quiet for a moment. "My husband died for gold. Not directly, it was a mining accident. But he was only in that mine because gold fever had taken him, made him reckless, desperate to strike it rich. The mine collapsed and 12 men died. For what? A scene that played out 3 months later. Elijah set down the rifle, giving her his full attention. "I see that same fever in the men arriving here," Martha continued. "See it in their eyes, hear it in their voices. They'll do anything to possess what Buck found, including killing you if they have to." "I know. Then why not run?" "Because I'm tired of running. Spent 3 years drifting, never putting down roots, never standing for anything. This orchard, this cursed, twisted, beautiful orchard, it's the first thing in 3 years that made me feel like I could have a home again. I won't abandon it." Martha reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "Then I won't abandon you." The touch lingered, meaningful and warm. Elijah turned his hand over, threading his fingers through hers. "You could get hurt," he said. "So could you. So could Buck. So could Dutch and everyone else involved. That doesn't change what needs to be done." They sat like that for a moment, hands joined, understanding passing between them without words. Whatever was coming, they'd face it together. Dutch arrived an hour later with Ranger Weatherby and 2 other men Elijah didn't recognize. One was older, maybe 60, with the scarred hands of a lifetime of hard work. The other was younger, lean and alert, with the bearing of someone who'd seen combat. "Elijah Crane," Dutch said. "Meet Samuel Gray and Thomas Walsh. Sam's an old prospector, been in these mountains for 40 years. Tom's former cavalry served in the Apache campaigns." Samuel extended a weathered hand. "Heard about your troubles. Figured you could use help from someone who's seen gold fever before. I've seen it too, Thomas added. Lost friends to it. Rather see it stopped than see it spread. I appreciate that. But this could get dangerous. Son, Samuel said with a slight smile, I'm 63 years old. I've survived cave-ins, claim jumpers, grizzly bears, and 3 different types of fever. Danger's just another day. And I didn't survive 5 years fighting Apaches to die quietly in a rocking chair, Thomas added. Rather go out standing for something. Elijah felt something ease in his chest. He wasn't alone. Wasn't facing this as just one man with an old dog. They spent the morning fortifying the orchard's perimeter. Thomas had a military mind, seeing defensive possibilities Elijah had missed. They established clear sightlines, created choke points in the natural paths between trees, and prepared positions that would allow defenders to fall back if needed. Samuel contributed practical wisdom, where to cache supplies, how to create signals, what signs to watch for in approaching threats. By afternoon, they'd transformed the orchard from open ground to defendable terrain. Not impregnable, but costly enough to take that attackers would have to think twice. Buck seemed to understand the seriousness of the situation. The dog ranged constantly, checking the perimeter, alert to everything. His presence was comforting. A living early warning system with instincts sharper than any human's. As the sun began its descent, a rider approached carrying a white flag. Elijah recognized one of Mallory's associates from their previous meeting. Mr. Crane, the man called from a safe distance. Mr. Mallory would like to speak with you. He's willing to come alone, unarmed, under truce. Elijah exchanged glances with Dutch, who'd positioned himself near the orchard's entrance. Why should I trust that? Elijah called back, because Mr. Mallory respects courage, and you've shown that. He believes this situation can be resolved without violence. All he asks is a conversation. Against his better judgment, Elijah agreed. They set terms. Mallory could approach alone at sunset, unarmed, with witnesses present. Any sign of treachery, and the truce was void. Mallory arrived precisely at sunset, his expensive clothes somehow still immaculate despite days in a frontier town. He walked calmly into the orchard, showing his empty hands, and stopped 10 feet from where Elijah stood, with the Winchester cradled in his arms. Mr. Crane, Mallory said with a slight nod. Thank you for agreeing to meet. You've got 5 minutes. Talk. Direct. I appreciate that. Mallory looked around at the prepared defenses, the positioned men. You've made this difficult. I respect that, but it's also futile. I have 23 armed men arriving tomorrow at dawn. Professionals, not local toughs. They'll take this orchard whether you defend it or not. Then why the conversation? Because I'd prefer to avoid bloodshed. You're a principled man, Mr. Crane, and principle is admirable. But it's also expensive. Those men you've gathered, Gray, Walsh, the sheriff, Mrs. Hendricks, they'll die if they stand with you. Is principle worth their lives? That's for them to decide, is it? Or are you asking them to die for your pride? The word stung because they held a kernel of truth. Elijah was asking these people to risk everything. I've made them no promises, Elijah said. No guarantees. They're here because they choose to be, because they believe some things are worth defending. And what are you defending? Gold you haven't been paid for? An orchard that's been dead for 30 years? Or just the principle of saying no to me? I'm defending the right to do honest work without being destroyed by men who think money makes them above the law. Mallory's expression shifted, showing genuine curiosity. You really believe that, don't you? You actually think your honesty and integrity matter against the reality of power and resources? I think they're all that matters. Then you're a fool. A noble one, perhaps, but still a fool. Mallory's tone hardened. Last chance, Mr. Crane. Walk away tonight. Take Mrs. Hendricks, take your dog, and leave. I'll give you $10,000 for your trouble, and forget you existed. Stay, and you'll die with everyone who stands beside you. I'm staying. Mallory studied him for a long moment, something like regret crossing his face. I wish you'd chosen differently, truly. Men like you are rare, and the world needs you more than it needs me. But if you won't step aside, I'll go through you, and I won't lose sleep over it. He turned and walked away, his white flag hanging limp in the still evening air. When he'd vanished into the gathering darkness, Dutch appeared at Elijah's elbow. "You could still take his offer," the sheriff said quietly. "No shame in it." "Yes, there would be, because then Mallory wins. Men like him always win, and men like us always step aside. I'm tired of that being the way of things, even if it costs us everything." Especially then. That night they held a final council. Elijah addressed the group honestly, laying out what Mallory had said, the odds they faced, the reality of what tomorrow might bring. "Anyone who wants to leave, do it now," he said. "No judgment, no hard feelings. This isn't your fight." No one moved. "It became our fight when we chose to stand with you," Samuel said. "Gold fever's a disease. I've seen it spread through camps, turn friends into murderers, destroy whole communities. Someone has to say no. Might as well be us. Besides," Thomas added with a slight smile, "I've faced worse odds. At least this time I know who the enemy is." Martha squeezed Elijah's hand. "We're in this together, all the way." They spent the night preparing. Thomas drilled them on basic defensive tactics, where to position, how to coordinate, when to fall back. Samuel shared tricks he'd learned over 40 years of defending claims against jumpers and thieves. Dutch distributed what weapons the town could muster. Not much, but better than nothing. Elijah found himself alone with Buck as midnight approached. The dog sat beside him at the orchard's heart, beneath the tree where the chest had been buried. "I got you into this," Elijah said quietly. "You were just being a dog, doing what dogs do. And now we're facing down an army because of it." Buck's tail moved once, content simply to be with his person. "If something happens to me tomorrow, if I don't make it, Dutch will take care of you. Martha too. They're good people. You'll be all right." The dog pushed his head against Elijah's leg, offering comfort in the only way he knew. Elijah sat in the darkness, rifle across his knees, thinking about the path that had led here. The drought that took his homestead. The years of drifting. The morning he'd walked into Ash Hollow with no more plan than finding work and a place to rest. How had it come to this? How had a simple desire to work the land become a fight for survival? But he knew the answer. It had always been going to come to this. From the moment Brennan buried that gold, from the moment Buck dug it up, the path was set. Violence begets violence. Greed draws more greed. The cycle only stops when someone refuses to continue it. Let that someone be him. As dawn approached, Elijah took position behind one of the larger trees with clear sightlines to the orchard's western approach. That's where Mallory's men would come from. It offered the best terrain for a coordinated assault. Dutch positioned himself at the southern edge, Weatherby at the north. Thomas and Samuel took the center, creating a crossfire zone. Martha stayed at the eastern boundary, ready to provide support and evacuate wounded if needed. Buck ranged between positions, connecting them all, carrying messages when needed. The dog seemed to understand his role, moving with purpose and focus. The sun rose red and angry, painting the sky the color of blood. In the distance, dust rose from multiple points, riders approaching in coordinated groups. Mallory's army was coming. Elijah checked his rifle one last time. 13 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. Not much for a battle, but he'd make each one count. Beside him, carved into the tree's bark, he noticed something he'd missed before. A message carved in Brennan's hand. "May God forgive what I'm about to do." The captain had written that 70 years ago, preparing to bury gold that would haunt this land for generations. Had he known then that it would come to this? That men would eventually fight and die over what he'd tried to hide? "I understand now," Elijah whispered to Brennan's ghost. "You tried to prevent this, tried to seal it away. But some things won't stay buried. Some debts demand payment." In the distance, the first riders came into view. Professionals, as Mallory had promised. Riding in formation, armed and ready, Elijah raised his rifle, sighting along the barrel. Whatever happened next, he'd face it standing. Face it with people who believed in something beyond gold and greed. Face it knowing he'd chosen principle over profit. That had to count for something. That had to matter. The riders came closer, sunlight gleaming on weapons. Elijah took a breath. steadied himself, and waited. Spring arrived late to Ash Hollow, but when it came, it transformed the valley. The orchard that had been barren for 30 years suddenly erupted with life. Not the twisted, grudging growth of previous attempts, but real, healthy blossoms. Elijah stood among the trees on a clear April morning, Buck at his side, hardly believing what he saw. White flowers covered branches that had been dead gray just months before. The air smelled sweet, clean, hopeful. Brennan would have loved this, Martha said, joining him. In her hands she carried official papers, sealed and stamped. What's that? The deed. Town council voted unanimously last night. The orchard is yours, Elijah. Legally, officially yours, with the designation that it remain a memorial in perpetuity. He took the papers, reading the formal language that granted him ownership of 5 acres of land that had changed his life. His name, Elijah Crane, listed as steward and caretaker. Below it an annotation, Brennan Memorial Orchard, established 1866, restored 2023. I don't know what to say. Say you'll stay. Say you'll keep doing what you've been doing. That's all anyone asks. I'll stay, he promised. Long as these trees stand, I'll tend them. They walked the rows together, examining each tree's progress. Some were thriving magnificently. Others struggled but showed life. A few, too damaged by decades of neglect, would never fully recover. But even those served purpose. Standing as reminders of persistence, of the cost of abandonment, the town had changed too. New businesses had opened, drawn by the publicity around the treasure discovery. Not the gold rush boom that might have destroyed the community, but steady, sustainable growth. A new hotel, an expanded general store, even talk of a railroad spur that might connect them to larger markets. Tobias Reed's store thrived, the skeptical shopkeeper having become one of Elijah's staunchest supporters. Samuel Gray had moved permanently into town, serving as orchard consultant and resident storyteller. Thomas Walsh taught tracking and wilderness skills to local youth, finding purpose in passing on his knowledge. And Martha had become Elijah's partner in every sense. They'd married quietly in the winter, with Dutch officiating and Buck as witness. No fuss, no grand celebration, just 2 people choosing to face whatever came next, together. On a warm June afternoon, with the orchard in full bloom, a ceremony was held. Federal officials, local dignitaries, and nearly everyone from Ash Hollow gathered to formally dedicate the Brennan Memorial Orchard. Elijah had been asked to speak. He stood before the crowd, Buck at his heel, and searched for words to capture everything that had happened. Captain Joshua Brennan planted these trees as penance, he began, as a way to seal away something he thought too dangerous to leave exposed. But secrets don't stay buried. They call out, drawing the curious and the greedy. What Buck found last year wasn't just gold. It was history demanding to be acknowledged. He gestured at the blooming trees around them. These trees grew twisted and strange, because the truth beneath them was twisted and strange. Was guilt, hidden treasure, deaths and madness, all of it poisoning the ground. But once the truth came to light, once the gold was removed and properly accounted for, the trees could finally grow right. There's a lesson in that, I think. About how secrets harm us. About how truth, however painful, lets us heal. About how patient labor can redeem even the most cursed ground. He paused, looking at the faces gathered before him. People who'd stood with him. People who'd become neighbors, friends, family. This orchard is memorial to those who lost their way. But it's also promise to those who find theirs. A reminder that even broken things can grow again if given care and time. After the ceremony, as people mingled and celebrated, Elijah found himself alone at the tree where Buck had first dug. The earth was fully restored now, grass growing where the chest had lain buried. No one looking at it would guess what had been hidden there, but Elijah knew. Would always know. This spot had changed his life, given him purpose, connected him to a story spanning 70 years. He knelt, placing his hand on the ground. "Thank you, Captain," he said quietly, "for trusting that someone would eventually understand. For planting these trees and holding faith that they'd matter someday." Buck nuzzled his hand, and Elijah smiled. The dog was 14 now, moving slowly, sleeping more. But his eyes still held that sharp intelligence, that loyal devotion that had never wavered. You too, old friend. None of this happens without you. As the sun set over Ash Hollow, painting the orchard in shades of gold and amber, Elijah stood with Martha watching the day end. The work would continue tomorrow, pruning, tending, caring, year after year, until these trees reached their full potential. But for tonight he allowed himself to simply enjoy what they'd built. A memorial that was also promise, ground that was cursed and blessed both, a place where past and future could finally make peace. First fruit this fall, Martha predicted. If the blossoms hold and weather cooperates. Apples from trees that were dead 30 years ago. Hard to believe, no harder than treasure buried by a Confederate captain and found by a drifter's dog. This whole story's hard to believe. She was right. If someone had told him a year ago, when he walked into Ash Hollow with nothing but a pack and a dog, that he'd find hidden gold, face down criminals, become wealthy, marry, and restore a cursed orchard, he'd have laughed. But that's exactly what happened, all because he'd chosen to stop running. To stand still long enough for purpose to find him. His father's broken compass sat on his mantle now, beside Brennan's pocket watch. Both frozen at particular moments, unable to fulfill their original functions. But together they told a story about finding direction even when traditional guides fail. About measuring time by what matters rather than mere minutes. Duck appeared, carrying a stick, his invitation to play. At 14, the dog still had moments of puppyish enthusiasm. Elijah threw the stick, watching Buck trot after it with stiff dignity. He's earned his rest, Martha observed. That dog's worked harder than most people I know. He has. But I think he still likes having purpose. Likes being useful. Like his person. Elijah smiled. Maybe we're suited after all. As darkness fell, they walked back to town together, Buck between them. The orchard behind them stood silhouetted against the deepening sky, twisted trees now bearing hope instead of secrets. Tomorrow, federal archaeologists would arrive to document the site properly, create a historical record. Next week, the first tour groups would visit, drawn by the story of Confederate gold and the dog who found it. Next month, agricultural specialists would assess the orchard's commercial potential, but tonight it was just a place where things grew, where patient labor met stubborn earth and slowly, impossibly won. Elijah thought about the men who'd failed here before him, Jacob Thornton, Michael Perry, Samuel Reeves. They'd been defeated not by the land, but by what they brought to it. Greed, fear, expectation. They'd wanted the orchard to yield treasure, not fruit. He'd wanted only to make things grow. And in wanting that simple thing, he'd found everything else. The boarding house lights glowed warm ahead. Inside, Dutch waited with news from Denver about Mallory's trial. Samuel had promised to share stories about old mining days. Thomas was teaching Elijah chess, claiming a farmer needed to learn strategy. It was good. It was home. Buck pressed against Elijah's leg, offering comfort even as he himself needed support. The dog's faithful presence, steady despite age and stiffness. "You did good, boy," Elijah said quietly. "You found what needed finding. Changed everything with one hole in the ground. That's something." Buck's tail moved once, content. They reached the boarding house and Elijah paused to look back one final time. The orchard was invisible now, swallowed by darkness. But he knew it was there, would always be there. Growing, changing, fulfilling the promise Brennan made 70 years ago, a memorial. A garden, a second chance for the land. For the town, for a drifter who'd almost forgotten what it felt like to have roots. Elijah opened the door, light and warmth spilling out, voices raised in greeting. Martha took his hand. Buck trotted inside, heading for his favorite spot by the fire, and Elijah followed, leaving the past in the darkness behind him, stepping forward into whatever came next, knowing that sometimes a man and his dog are all that stand between hope and greed. Sometimes the land we've given up on still has one more story to tell, and sometimes, if we're very lucky, that story has a happy ending after all.